Hey guys, it's Mike from Eldorado Guitars, and today I'm here to talk to you about the MGL50 HG. Let's check it out. So a little taste there for you in the mix. Like I said, this is the MGL50 HG. You'll see this amp up at the very top here. And the MGL50 HG is a super cool amp. MGL stands for Mark's Guitar Loft, and it's made by Mark up in, I believe, Maine. I bought this amp used on TGP, but this amp I think is one of the best bargains out there if you're looking for something very straightforward. So if you're sitting there saying to yourself like, hey Mike, all those amps behind you look really cool, but I see a lot of knobs and switches and options. If you're not one of those guys, you're not a knob tweaker, right? You just want something that's very simple and very straightforward, the MGL is a great fit for you. Now, this is, like I said, the HG version. So there are two different versions of the MGL. There's the regular MGL and there's the HG. So the regular MGL has, I believe, about as much gain as kind of like a stock JCM-800, maybe like a little bit more. And then the HG has significantly more gain. I'm not sure what the exact percentage is, but it basically has more gain. Now, Mark has been very clear to say that they're two different circuits. He said that this isn't just like the MGL, but with like another tube or something like that. He claims it's actually a different circuit, a different design. So they're apparently not actually exactly the same. But kind of what I really like about this amp is if you're looking for something, like I said, that's very straightforward, like a JCM-800, and you just wish it had a little more juice, right? And maybe like a modern feature set, then I think the MGL is a really great fit for you. So right now I am using the MGL50 into a greenback cab on the aux box, and this is the default greenback cab. So when you first start up your aux, I believe this is the first preset it sets you to. So I'm not using anything fancy, I'm not using any custom IRs or anything like that. I'm just using the default greenback. This amp I think can sound really good with greenbacks or V30s. I'll flip through a couple of different speaker options here for you just to kind of show you kind of what that would look like and what that would sound like. And just for your awareness today, I am using my good old 1979 Gibson Les Paul Custom Silverburst. This one, the pickups, I did change them. I still do have the stock pickups, but I changed them. This is now the bare knuckle Steve Stevens set. But other than that, it's all original, I guess, except for the pots. The pots have been replaced. I'll do a little bit more on this video, this guitar in another video. But other than that, it's all stock and ready to rip. So let's show you a couple of different tones here. So the cool thing I like about this amp is, like I said, if you don't want a lot of knob tweaking, then this is really the amp for you. You can see right now when I flip over to the amp, I've got everything pretty much set at noon. I have the presence, I think, at 4, bass, middle, treble is all at 5. I've got the master at 4 because, again, I'm going into the aux box, so it's all kind of being soaked there. And then on the far right knob, the gain, I think I've got about 4 right now. So it's really not a tremendous amount of gain that I'm pushing through the amp right now. These pickups are a little hot. I think Steve Stevens has said that basically this bridge pickup is sort of like a modified JB, so I don't know what the exact resistance or whatever is. I think it's like 14 or 15. So it's a little bit of a hot bridge pickup, but this amp has plenty of distortion, right? Like, you're not going to be sitting here saying, oh, I wish it had more gain, or I feel like I need to boost it. I really just don't think that's probably necessary for most players. So let's go ahead and show you a couple of tones. So this is kind of the tone that I was playing with when we first came in, just to give you an idea, and you can hear it outside of a mix. So a really cool sound, just like, you know, the thing I like about this amp is it's like, this amp to me is kind of like a Telecaster, right? It's like, you know, a Telecaster is just like a solid, like working man's guitar, right? Just like nothing fancy about it. It's kind of like a slab of wood, right? And it just gets you right to the point. I kind of feel like the MGL is really the same kind of thing. It really just sort of gets right to the point. If you're looking for a really classic Marshall sound, but you just wish it had a little more oomph, you know, and like I said, some modern features like a better master volume, an effects loop, right? Then this really is the amp for you. Now, I do think this amp can sound really cool at some lower gain settings and for some other things. So I'm not going to change anything on the amp right now, but let's go ahead and roll back the volume just a little bit. And let's just kind of see what kind of tones we can get here just by rolling the volume back a little bit. So for perspective, I was on 10 during the intro, which got you this. And I'm going to roll it back to about like 5 now, and let's see kind of what we get. I'll go back even a little further. Let's go to like 2. So it's pretty good, actually, right? It cleans up pretty well. And again, this is a hot bridge pickup, right? And it cleans up pretty well. Now, one thing you'll notice is, I will say with this amp, the volume doesn't stay quite as consistent as some of the other amps in this room. So, you know, obviously when you roll down the volume, you're always going to lose a little bit of volume. But I think the idea really on a lot of amps, like for example, Dave Friedman's amps, the idea is you roll down the volume, the amp cleans up, but it doesn't really lose a ton of volume, right? So this amp, I do think, loses maybe a little more volume than the Friedman's, right? So it does, you know, like maybe around 4 or 5, it kind of jumps up there, you can hear. So like maybe if you were trying to do this in some sort of like a slash thing where like, hey, I've got my volume set on like 8 and then 10, and then for my cleans, I roll it back. Like where you'd want to roll it back to is probably about like 4 or 5, you know? Now, you could always modify this with a compressor, right? So I'll turn on a compressor here, right? And that will allow me to turn the volume down a bit here to like 2 and still probably get a pretty good volume. So you can hear the compressor helps quite a bit, right? It sort of smooths it all out. And I will say that when I play with this amp, I do probably usually use the compressor. I'm just using a, this is a Keeley compressor mini that I've got down here. I do have the full-size version over in my pedal kind of collection over here. But I don't really tend to use it because this one is really just very simple and frankly works very effectively. So I would say if you get this amp, maybe consider getting a compressor, because I think it really does help a lot, because this amp really doesn't have a ton of natural compression outside of like when you're on 10, right? It doesn't really have a ton. So just something you should kind of maybe keep note on. Now let's move over to the neck pickup. I'll show you a couple of tones there because you're probably sitting there going like, hey Mike, how often am I going to play, you know, on the bridge pickup that low? So I'll go ahead and do the same kind of thing here. I still have the compressor on, and I'm going to turn the volume to about, I don't know, like 2 or 2.5 here. And let's just see on the neck pickup what we get. It's, you know, not quite super clean. Maybe I'll turn the compressor off and see what that does, because sometimes with neck pickups on Les Pauls, they can be a little woofy. So let's just see. You can see I now have no volume. So let's see here. Definitely better. And you can actually see on the neck pickup I can get a little more push, right? So very cool sound, right? Like very, very, very cool. So I just think this amp is really versatile, right? It takes effects really well. So let me turn on a chorus and you can kind of get an idea for, you know, what I'm kind of doing there. So very cool, right? I think that this amp really takes effects super well. I think definitely the clean tones and the neck pickup are very good, especially in a Les Paul where they can be a little bit woofy at times, right? But obviously, we're all kind of here for the gain, right? So let's do a little bit more experimenting with the gain. So what I'm going to do is let's flip over to the amp and let's go ahead and change a couple of settings here. So first, I'm going to switch around a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the treble up just a little bit. I'm going to pull the mids out just a little bit. I'll leave the bass the same. I'm going to turn the presence up just a little bit. And I might even turn the gain just a little bit up to like 4.5 or so. And let's just see kind of what we get there. All right, so let's go ahead and see what we get now. This is maybe more along the lines of kind of maybe how I normally play it. So let's just kind of take a look here. So it sounds really cool, right? I mean, a really, really, really good, just rock sound. I mean, what else can I say? You know, I think the MGL's beauty is in its simplicity. It's just really straightforward. It's really easy to get great tones, and it's really effective. Now, like I mentioned, this has all thus far been going through a greenback. So I'm actually going to change this over now, and let's change it. And I'm going to change it to, I can't see super well. Sorry about that. I should have apparently gotten a little closer. So here is a G12H. So let's switch over to a G12H. So if you know what this is basically a greenback, but with a heavy magnet instead of a medium magnet. So it tends to accentuate the highs and lows, almost sort of like Alnico 2 versus Alnico 5, right? The greenback 25 watt is more like an Alnico 2, where there's more mids and the highs and lows are a little soft. And then the G12H, the 30 watt with the heavy magnet, is a little bit more like Alnico 5, where the highs and lows are a bit more pronounced. I think this amp sounds really cool with this setting, with these speakers. I might want to change the settings on the amp. So let's just see what we've got really quickly, and then I'll go ahead and change some settings around. And I'm just going to kind of play the same riff just so you can get an idea of what it sounds like with these different speaker types. So let's check this out. right? It's a cool sound, a little bit different, right? It sounds similar, but a little bit different, but still sounds very, very, very good. Now, I will show you something really quick. I want to flip over to the amp, and let's go ahead and experiment with one of my favorite features on the amp, which is this little switch over here on the right-hand side. So this little switch right here actually will take you from a more JCM 800 type sound up here in the upper switch, and then if you switch this lower, it switches to more of a Plexi value. I think what it's doing is switching the bright cap, I think, on the input. I'm not 100 sure. You might want to check, but I'm going to go ahead and just flip that. And then let's go ahead, and I've not touched anything else, right? Same speaker, same settings, same everything. So let's go ahead and just check that out really quickly, and I'll play, you know, a variation of the same riff here. So let's check it out. So pretty cool, right? You can hear it sounds a little more Plexi-ish. It's a little less sharp in the highs like an 800 would be. It reduces the lows a little bit, right? Softens them up a little bit, and just allows for a different kind of sound, right? So what I've found personally is I kind of like the 800 sort of sound a little bit more when I'm playing on my own, or when I'm like the only guitar playing, right? So like if I'm doing like a crunch tone or something like that, and I'm the only guitar in the band, or I'm playing like with a backing track, or on some kind of track where I'm trying to minimize the number of guitars, and then I think the 800 setting works really well. But I think the Plexi setting works really well if you've got a more crowded band mix, right? Maybe you have two guitars, or maybe you have like a keyboard or something like that. So it's just kind of useful to sort of shift things around just a little bit there, and kind of do something slightly different. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to flip back over to the amp really quickly, and let's just try a totally different setting. So let's go ahead and set it back to 800 style. I am going to do something a little bit more mid-rangey. So let's up the mids. I'm going to pull the treble back a little bit. I'm going to pull the bass back a little bit, and then I'm going to up the presence a little bit. And I'm going to up the gain just a hair to noon. So now the gain is right at noon. And I'm going to leave the master exactly the same. And let's go ahead and just kind of see what sort of tone we get now. Again, the magnet and the speaker are still the same, so this is a G12 30 with the heavy magnet. So let's go ahead and check that out. So very cool, right? Totally different sound, but sounds awesome, right? Much more mid-forward. This is something that would cut a lot more in a mix, right? Sounds a little bit more old school. I've noticed the mid knob on the MGL is very interactive. It's probably one of my favorite features of the amp. Like, you can really scoop a ton of mids out if you go all the way down, and you can absolutely just get a total classic rock, really Plexi sounding thing with a ton of that Marshall mid sound that cuts through if you crank it up. And actually, that's one of my favorite things about this amp, is that it really captures that old gnarly Marshall thing very, very well. You know, some of the amps I have in this room, right, are Marshall inspired, but they are a little bit more modern, right? So they're a little bit darker on the top end. They're a little bit smoother. They have more compression, right, naturally. The MGL doesn't really do that. The MGL is much more old school. It really retains the kind of gnarly bite and treble cut of an old Marshall. And I think a lot of that has to do with the components that Mark is putting into it. Another one of my favorite things about this amp is that it ships with really high quality tubes. You get a set of Siemens NOS EL34s. So if you don't know what those are Those are out of production. NOS stands for new old stock, which means they're tubes that are around, like in existence, but that have never been used. And Siemens was a place that made EL34s back, I believe, in the 70s and 80s. And I don't think they've made tubes in a very long time. So those tubes are worth a lot of money. I think right now, especially with the tube shortage that's going on, those tubes command a really premium price, like over $200 a set. So you get those included with the amp, which is amazing. And then Mark puts also NOS Chinese 12AX7s in it, which I think really contributes to that really bright, old Marshall, gnarly kind of, thing that's going on. So definitely a lot of value to be had in this amp. But I want to take it in like a little bit of a different direction here. So let's try and get some heavy tones out of this thing. And then I'll kind of wrap it up with a little bit of an 80s tone, and let's see kind of what we can do here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch my speaker, and I'm going to switch the amp. So first I'm going to switch the amp here. So let's go ahead and I will tweak the amp. So I'm going to go ahead and do, like I said, something totally different here. So I'm going to increase the preamp gain. I am going to increase the treble. I'm going to suck out a ton of mids, and I'm going to up the bass a little bit. I'm going to leave the presence around 6. And then what I am going to do over here on the aux is I'm going to go ahead and choose a V30 setting. So I've switched over to a V30. This is a Marshall-based V30. So this is not a Mesa Boogie V30. I can do that in a second, I guess, if we want to. I just typically use this one. And this is, I think, one of the default ones that's provided by Universal Audio. So again, I try not to use anything that's like too fancy or too customized, so that you can kind of hear what it would sound like with just sort of default presets, right? So what I'm going for here is something of more like an old school kind of, metal thing. So maybe think like, old Metallica or something like that. So let's just kind of see what it sounds like and take it from here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the volume up, and let's just check it out. Sorry, I kind of messed battery up a little bit there. But it's okay. I don't play too much old Metallica anymore these days. It's taking me back to my days of being a 15-year-old and sitting in the basement. It can really get that kind of like old Metallica thrash kind of thing going on. I don't know if I want to go so far as to say it sounds like a Mark II C Plus or something like that, right? Like, I don't know. But I think it's a very, very good old school sound. So if you want to do something where you just suck all the mids out and chug, I mean, this really can still do that, Right? I mean, it's a very addicting tone to play, I'm going to say. So very, very cool. So, right, you can do everything, as you can see, from like classic stuff with a greenback and the gain kind of rolled back and maybe that Plexi switch to more, aggressive modern stuff. If you go back to the 800 style and you up the gain and that sort of thing. Maybe one last thing I'll kind of try and put together here before I get to maybe a couple of the shortcomings of the amp, and that is, let's do something a little more 80s. So I think probably a lot of people who are buying this amp are thinking like, hey, you know, I'm really hoping to get some cool 80s sounds out of this. You can totally do that. So like what I'd recommend is I kind of put like the mids and the treble up a little around 6. I might dial the bass back a little around 4, dial the presence to about 5, especially the V30, I might go between 4 and 5. And then I'm going to up the gain just a little more, man. Let's take it up to 7 and just see how it goes. And by the way, I will show you how far you can go with the gain on 10 in a second, because I know that that's a question for a lot of people. Is like, hey, Mike, like, what's the max, right? So I will show you that in a second. But hopefully you can tell this amp has plenty of gain. I'm not using any boosts or anything. The compressor's been off, right? I'm just using a little bit of reverb from the aux and a little bit of delay here from my Earthquaker Devices dispatch maker. That's it. So other than that, you're just hearing the amp. So let's see if we can get something a little 80s going here. Let's check it out. Sorry about my butchering of Billy Idol there, but I haven't played that song in a really long time, and it just struck me as very 80s. I'm not sure what else to play. Like maybe, you know, gets a little bit of that White Snake thing. I'm just trying to rattle off every 80s riff I know. So, you know, it can get really, really good, you know, 80s, 90s type sounds, right? All that stuff is really in the wheelhouse for this amp. So, again, just really cool, really simple, some tweaking of some volume knobs, and you can really go a long way with this amp. Now, one last thing I do want to show you really quickly is I know some people want to know, hey, Mike, what's 10? What does it sound like with a boost? That kind of thing. So first thing I'm going to do is let's do it boosted. So I will boost this. I'm going to, well, I can leave the gain, I guess, the same. I guess it's okay. I'll leave the gain the same. I'm going to scoot over here slightly so I can hit the pedal. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play a little, you know, little something here, and then I'll hit the boost, and then you can see what it sounds like. So first, no boost. The boost. Boost off. Boost on. So, I mean, I think like the boost could be good for solos, right? I do tend to really hit my parametric EQ for that, which I kind of did in one of the last videos I did with the Cali, so you might want to check that out. I'll show you kind of what that sounds like. So here's kind of just the crunch tone I was using. Then here's it boosted with the parametric EQ. So definitely if you put a boost, or like I said, that parametric EQ is in the loop, the amp really will just catch fire even more. So I think that's just one of the really, really cool features of this amp. A couple of the shortcomings of this amp. Every amp has shortcomings, right? Every single amp you see here has some kind of shortcoming for the most part, right? So if I had to give shortcomings to the MGL, first thing I would probably say is I do feel like sometimes with the MGL, the simplicity is really cool, like I mentioned in this video, but sometimes it can be a little hard to tweak the knobs right to find exactly what you're looking for. So like one thing that I've noticed, for example, is that the MGL tends to sometimes get lost in the mix if you set the knobs the wrong way, right? So like a lot of times if you suck too much of the mids out, and that's kind of a problem with every amp, right? But it just sort of tends to get lost. Or if you don't have the presence up enough, it will tend to get lost a little bit. So my recommendation would be, you know, play around a lot with the mid knob, because like I said, it really affects the sound very prominently. The gain in the mid really is what you want to be tweaking around with this amp. And I think that's really going to take you a really long way and get you where you want to go. Second shortcoming, I think maybe of this amp is, again, it's just very simple, right? Like what you see is what you get, and that's about it. There's only two things on it that really are fancy at all. And the first is that 800 and Plexi switch that I showed you in the front. And then in the back, there is an option between like a classic and a modern voicing. But I'm going to be honest with you, it's kind of confusing to me how it works. I messaged Mark about it to try and understand a little bit more. And it's basically like, I think, two different levels of variable negative feedback that you can kind of tweak it to. But you're a bit limited because I think the one setting only works, I think, if the amp is running at 16 ohms. So it's a little bit odd. So you might want to email Mark and just ask him about that. I don't want to say too much that's not accurate, but just know that there's a voicing switch on the back between classic and modern. Right now it's on modern, I believe. Because that's what works with the 16 ohm tap. And then I think classic works with the 8 ohm maybe, or maybe vice versa. But like I said, it's kind of confusing to me how it works. It's not like a response knob on a Friedman or the hair switch on the Cali or something where it's straightforward and it has nothing to do with like the ohms that you're running at. So that's I think why it's kind of a little bit confusing to me. So it would be nice if maybe Mark was a little clearer about that, or provided some more documentation around it or something, just to like let you know exactly kind of how it operates. One other thing I will say about this amp, if I have to mention a shortcoming, which is it does have a lot of gain. Like if you try and dial this amp back, it starts to not really sound that great under like 2 or 3 on the preamp gain. So this amp definitely, to me, kind of comes to life around 4. Somewhere between 4 to 7 is really, I think, where most of the kind of wheelhouse is. And again, I'll show you what it sounds like on 10 in a second, but I think that that's really the sweet spot, right? Every amp has a sweet spot. Like I can tell you on Dave's amps, right, on the Friedmans, it's usually to me around like 6 to 8. Like that's the sweet spot, right? When you put the gain around there, the amp just kind of fills out correctly, and it sounds its best. And I think with the MGL50 HG, it's somewhere between like 4 and 7 is really kind of where the amp really just feels most comfortable. If you set the preamp gain under 4, it tends to get a little thin and a little anemic. But here, tell you what, let me show you it. I will leave all the settings the same, except for I'm going to switch the gain down pretty low, and then I'll pump it up all the way to 10. So first, let's go ahead and turn it down really low, just so you can kind of hear what I'm saying there. So I'm going to turn the preamp gain down to like 2, right? And let's just kind of see what that sounds like. And you'll kind of hear, I think, what I mean. It just kind of thins out. It just doesn't really... I think you would hope, I suppose, that it gets more of like a classic rock kind of vibe. But I don't know, to me, it just doesn't. There's just something about it. So let's just check it out really quickly. I just think it gets really thin and really bitey, right? So maybe if I dial the volume back, it might help a little, like... bit better with the volume. I was being very careful. I don't know if you saw, I was making very, very, very small adjustments, and it made a very large difference, right? So like... So it's pretty sensitive to like your pick attack. Again, it's not a very compressed amp, right? But I just think on these lower settings, it sounds just a little thin. You know, it just sounds, and I'm using a Les Paul, right? So it's a very thick sounding guitar, and I think it even sounds a little thin. So that's maybe like my final criticism of the amp. Now let me show you what it does sound like with the gain all the way on 10, because obviously everybody wants to know, Mike, what does the amp sound like on 10? So let's go ahead and check that out. We'll flip over here. I'll turn it up to 10. So we'll go all the way here, and I'm just going to put everything back kind of around noon, just so you can get an idea. I'll put the presence back at 4. And this is basically where we started out today, except that obviously I had the gain much lower. I think I had the gain on 4 or 4.5, I think. Maybe 4 when we started with the Guns N' Roses thing. So this is what it sounds like on 10. And like I said, it's got plenty of gain. I don't think you're going to be lacking for gain on this thing, but here you go. Personally, I don't love that sound. I think just like a JCM800, if you ever owned an old JCM800, you know the gain was really only usable until about like 6 or 7. And then when you went past 6 or 7, it started to kind of fall apart, right? Like the tightness started to go out of it. The distortion got a little like muddy and kind of flubby and weird. I think the MGL, probably because it's based on a JCM800, it's pretty much the same thing, right? I think past 7 or 8, it just starts to get kind of weird. So let me just, I'll go ahead and just dial it back one more time to kind of more of where we were at the beginning so you can hear what I mean, right? So I'll put it back on like 5 right now, so just straight up, right? And I think you'll hear that the amp still has a lot of aggression, and it still has a lot of bite, but it just kind of cleans up, right? It's not as woofy and as loose and muddy. So let's just check it out. So pretty cool, right? I think it really sounds good on that setting. Now, one more thing I want to show you. I'm going to do, this will be the last bit that I cover here. So let me flip back to the amp one more time, and I want to show you something that's actually one of my favorite things to do with this amp. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to increase the mids a bit. I'm going to increase the treble a bit. I'm going to keep the bass a little low, and I'm going to leave the preamp around 5 or so, and I'm going to switch over to the Plexi value here. And then what I'm going to do on the aux is I'm going to switch back to that greenback setting. So I've switched back to a greenback. So we're kind of sort of where we were at the beginning, but the settings are a little bit different. And the reason I did this is because I actually discovered that when you put the settings about where I have them right now, and you use the greenback setting, you get a really cool old Green Day tone, which is actually really interesting. So like, let me go ahead and just kind of show you what I mean. Like... Like it's kind of, I think like it's interesting because I think this amp is kind of marketed as more of like an 80s type thing, But I actually think you can get a lot of really good old pump tones from this, and like pop punk tones and other pump tones. Probably because I guess it's based on an 800, right? And a lot of those guys used 800s in the late 80s, early 90s kind of scene. So this amp is just really cool, really versatile. A couple tweaks of the knobs, and you can really get a lot of great sounds. And frankly, this thing is really affordable. In my last review, when I was talking about the Cali, some people started asking me about pricing. I did not buy this amp new, like I mentioned. I bought the MGL used on TGP. I forget what I bought it for. I think 1800, 1750, 1800, something like that. I could check. I don't remember offhand. But new, I think this amp is like a little over $2,000. I think it's like 2100 or 2200 or something. Which, again, considering you get all those NOS tubes and just a really straightforward rock and roll machine, this thing kicks ass, man. What a great value. I mean, seriously. So, if you're interested, give Mark a call, or if you have any questions or comments, leave them down in the comments below. I'm happy to answer anything you guys have. If you like my content, help me out by clicking that subscribe button. I know everybody says that shit, but really I just want to get to 1,000 followers so that I can live stream. YouTube has rules where you can't live stream unless you have 1,000 followers. So it would really help me out if I could get to 1,000, just so I can do live streams instead of having to record these and that sort of thing. So anyways, this is Mike from Eldorado Guitars. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks a lot, everybody.